welcome to another edition of Splitting Hairs with Max and Nicky. I'm Max.
And I'm Nicky.
And together we're Max and Nicky.
On today's episode, we'll be talking about video game music and the evolution of video game music and why we prefer 8-bit and 16-bit video game music over sort of modern day video game compositions.
Well, I mean,
for the most part, in general.
I mean,
we're not knocking all of the music that's coming out today.
We'll talk about that in a second. We'll talk about the evolution to the best of our abilities.
We don't know. We're not saying we know everything about it.
We're not as well versed as some others.
We are.
Our older brother is very well versed.
We are versed in the subject.
We are versed in the subject,
but people like our older brother Brent are very.
I might consider him like sort of an authority figure on the subject.
Yes, of 8-bit and 16-bit.
Right. I'd say we know enough to be able to talk about it. I'd say.
Yes.
Which is why we're doing that today. In addition.
We wanted to just.
In addition, it's not just about. We want to talk about not just about the evolution, but also what makes video game music.
Well, we'll talk about it.
We'll talk about it.
We'll talk about
it.
But before we get to the subject of video games, we just wanted to announce that our band Little Person will be releasing a new 6-song EP. And it's going to be released worldwide this coming Monday, April 3rd. It'll be available on iTunes, Google Play, Amazon, and Bandcamp, and so on and so forth. I don't know if this...
The EP is called I Feel Fine, named after one of the tunes in the EP.
Yes, exactly. And
but we also just felt that title was befitting for the whole album in general.
Anyway, I don't think this episode is coming out in time for any listeners to be able to go and catch our EP release show, which is from the day we're recording this is tomorrow, which will be Thursday.
Right.
But
so anyway, I don't know why you're mentioning.
Anyway, the point is, please go check out our new EP. Just some pop tunes with a lot of harmonies, and it's you'll enjoy it, hopefully.
Yeah, it's good stuff, and what I'd like to think is some like good lyrics, some like introspective, thoughtful lyrics.
Basically, if you
sometimes introspective.
If you like the Beach Boys and if you like the Smiths, then you can count on probably liking this. Okay, let's get to video game music. Right. I mean, to start us off, I would like to mention that the opening song, our intro music to our podcast, and the outro music is a video game sounding song. It's an 8-bit sounding video game song, and
written, recorded, and produced by Nicholas Evan Weinbach.
That is correct. And I wanted to just talk about the process of recording this thing.
Right.
I wrote the song a long time ago, maybe when I was 18 years old, and I just, was really influenced
on the keyboard, on the piano.
I wrote it on the piano when I was like 18 years old, and I thought, oh, this sounds like a video game song. Maybe I could use this for a video game one day. I didn't know that I would end up using it for a podcast.
We've been into video game music for most of I'd say the first music we ever admitted to liking was video game music.
That and then maybe bossa nova music.
Right. That's not to say that we didn't like other music back in those days. We just didn't admit to liking other music.
Our mom and sister would drive us in the car, and they would listen to a lot of oldies music,
but we didn't admit to liking it.
For some reason, we didn't admit to liking it.
I think because
we love that music, right? And we are most influenced by that music.
Yeah, I think it's probably because our older brother wasn't really into it, and he thought some of it was cheesy. Right, we were really influenced by him, especially when we were younger. We're influenced by our sister too a lot,
but maybe not as much
back then though. I mean, so back in those days, we tended to try and
just copy,
emulate a lot of things that he.
But now that we're grown boys, we we have our own opinions on things, and one of our great loves in music are, some of those late 50s, 60s oldies tunes.
And you'll, if you catch our EP, actually, it's not to shameless self-promote so much anymore, but really, if you do listen to our new EP, like you'll definitely hear some of the influences from that era.
That is correct. Anyway, so I wrote this video game song when I was 18 or so on the piano, and I thought one day I'm going to use this for something, a video game perhaps. I didn't know that I'd be using it for a podcast one day. I don't even think podcasts were a thing back then.
Okay.
But so I wrote it back then, but I started recording it. Actually, while we were recording the EP, coincidentally, I took a break and I started recording this video game song. For some reason, I just thought, I want to release this.
No, well, the reason was because I think our older brother was showing us this video game, this song that somebody wrote in the style of a video game style song. And he was like, oh, this is really cool, guys. And Nicky kind of was like, I could do something like that. And so he started trying to record it himself.
Oh, I guess I was trying to prove our older brother that
he could
do something like that. Little did I know that it is, even though I had the basic melody and song structure and the chords down for the song, I didn't realize how difficult it is to record under the constraints of how video game composers back in the 80s had to write video game music.
So what he had recorded at the time, it sounded kind of like video game music as far as the sounds went, but it wasn't quite right. And Nicky will explain right now why that's so.
First of all, I'll mention that there are a lot of songwriters maybe or composers today, and they write songs called chiptunes. And it's supposed to kind of be in the style of these 8-bit video game songs, but they're not actually a lot of them don't constrain themselves to, there's four sounds that are four basic sounds.
This is on Nintendo, you should say, or on 8-bit stuff.
On 8-bit stuff, there are four sounds that a composer was able to use in the 80s. There are two square waves, there's a triangle wave, and there's white noise. That's all you can use.
Just for you guys know, it might be a little heady, this conversation for some people out there. You just have to know that basically all sounds that have a pitch basically are built on what's called a sine wave. And basically manipulation of that creates different kinds of sounds, essentially.
Right.
And so Nicky was talking about a square wave, and
a square wave, I guess you can maybe liken it more to like a flute sound maybe sometimes, although it could be used for bass. The triangle wave often would be used for a bass sound in those old video game tracks, although square wave was used sometimes as the bass. And white noise, which is basically all the frequencies.
Right, white noise is like all...
It's basically like a shh.
It's like the spectrum of sound. Spectrum of sound in a way.
But when you hear white noise, you'll just hear a shh. But it could be used as a percussive sound when it's just when it's manipulated in a certain way. It can be made to sound like a snare drum or even a kick drum, or but it's just really short sounds like or something like that.
Right, and then if you could even potentially manipulate white noise enough to create a sine wave,
right,
which would create a pitch. Actually, I mean, again, we're getting a little heady here. Just so you know, there's four different kinds of sounds.
There's four different kinds of sounds with 8-bit video game music.
Wait, hold on. What is 8-bit video game music, by the way? What is that?
I actually don't know.
8-bit, 16-bit. I think what it means is basically the capacity that the video game can...
Right. It doesn't necessarily have to do with the music. It has to do with the actual video game itself.
Right. So basically, as video games, evolve,
it runs on 8 bytes, and
right. I mean, the capacity grew basically. And Nintendo 64, for instance, is 64 bits, and Super Nintendo was 16 bits, and then so on and so forth. I mean, I don't know what it is now. I mean, I'm probably sure it's probably like a huge amount now.
Right.
It's like computers. Everyone knows their computers. We have a certain amount of memory we can hold on our
RAM and stuff like that.
RAM.
Anyway,
well, that is memory, but
anyway, so you had these 4 sounds, and so when I was recording this, when I was initially recording this thing, I didn't try to constrain myself to the 4 sounds or restrict myself to the 4 sounds. And, I showed it to my older brother, I showed it to Max, and they were saying, yeah, it sounds pretty good, but there's something about it that seems off. Maybe it seems cluttered or something like that. And I'm, when I attempted to record it recently for this podcast, I realized the reason why it sounds cluttered is because I wasn't restricting myself to just the 4 sounds. And it's really hard, actually. I really I have a lot of respect for those composers back then, because they had to make these songs sound like full sort of orchestrations in a way sometimes, but they were
full arrangements,
but they were restricted to 4 sounds. So,
and that's when that is the true mark of genius, in my opinion, is a creative genius, is being able to create something spectacular under constraints. And that's what a lot of composers who are professional composers do, is they will create some sort of constraint for themselves, or they'll give themselves some sort of limitations. And then if there's something within that limitation, this is, something in my composition class that my teacher would
Max was a music major in college.
Right. He would say, okay, create a composition based on these notes, for instance, okay? You can't use any other notes besides these notes, and you have to create a composition based on this. And then basically, he provided leeway after that. After we were done, he said, okay, now that you have this is the framework, okay, if you don't like certain things, now break the rules a bit if you want. And but with the Nintendo stuff, they couldn't break the rules because they were constrained by the technology, and that's utter pure genius to me.
As Burt Bacharach said,
they created something really cool.
Burt Bacharach, who's one of our biggest influences and also one of the best pop songwriters of all time, he was a classically trained, musician, and he said, you got to learn the rules before you break them,
He said that?
Yes, he did say that. And you can hear that he knew the rules in his music. You could hear it. But that's beside the point. So the point is, these video game composers, they were restricted, and they had to come up with clever ways to achieve sort of harmony. And I when I was making this intro music, I wanted to do harmonies, but then I figured out that there were too many sounds I was using. And there's one other sound that you could use, by the way, because there's a sampler in regular Nintendo. It had a sampler. So
what's a sampler?
A sampler, basically, it samples real noises, not just these computer generated noises, but they're real noises, whether they're it's me hitting my tongue to the roof of my mouth or me snapping. They're real noises, and they're actually recorded noises and they're called samples because you can it's like a sample of what that noise is.
Right, but was the sample, what is it called? Am I using the word correctly when I say verisimilitude on this? Was the sample a true, just sample of what you actually recorded?
Yes. Basically...
In other words, if you sampled a violin, would it have captured the actual sound of a good violin sound?
Here's the thing is...
In other words, what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe the fact that the technology was not as evolved at the time.
So would it capture the actual essence of the violin?
Not the essence. Would it capture the actual
full spectrum,
the full actual sound that you were trying?
Or
would it be like a cruddy version of it?
It might be a little cruddy, but I think it would capture the sound.
I guess.
It might be a little crude, but it would capture the sound. But here's the thing, Brent, our older brother, told me, because I was trying to use that sampler at first to use it to add another square wave or another triangle wave so I could add some harmony. But Brent told me that most of the time, video game composers didn't ever use the sampler. And when they did, it was very sparingly, and it was for actual, like, sometimes like voices or something like that. You know, I mean, it wasn't really, it was to not emulate one of the other waves. It was more to get a real sound in there, you know, and it was Americans who actually used the sampler more than the Japanese, apparently. I think that's what our older brother was telling me. Anyway, so
maybe it has to do with the discipline.
We respect the Japanese video game composers more. I
there's
wanted to honor that tradition and just try to even write this song without even using the sampler. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to do harmonies, but I had to figure out ways of, you know, getting around it, you know. And so basically sometimes I would do arpeggios or like quick arpeggios or different weird constructs. I started off with the harmonies, you know, having the sounds going at the same time. And then I realized, I can't use these sounds at the same time. You know, I can't use more than 2 square waves at the same time. So I kind of separated them, and, you know, you can make a sound really short. I mean, this is getting really in detail. The point is, you're under a lot of restrictions, and thus I think video game music, the genre, was born out of this
exactly.
The restrictions of these 4 sounds. There's a certain sound that came with
the construction. The construction of a composition was based on the constraints of the technology, and you have a particular.
There's a certain sound.
It created a genre. Basically.
It created a genre of video game music. And
it created a genre which is video game music.
No, exactly. That's what I'm saying, which is video game music.
I know.
And as we've evolved to now, we have video game composers have lost sight of that genre called video game music, and their quote unquote video game, the music that they're creating for video games is not what we would consider true video game music. Now, you know, as we go through the times, you know, Sega Genesis and then Super Nintendo, they had a lot more sounds to deal with. They had a lot more samples that they could use. But I think...
Did they have more channels?
Oh, they had a lot more channels.
Yeah, how many channels?
I think they had 8 or 6, 8, I believe.
No,
or 16, maybe. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure.
When we say channels, we mean basically your ability to use... Basically, if I have 2 channels, I can only use 2 different sounds at a time, basically. That's basically what I mean by that.
Right. So there are 4 channels. So there were not only 4 sounds for 8-bit music, but there's 4 channels, so you can only do those 4 sounds at one time. You can only do...
Right, you can only do 4 sounds at once. So, by the way, on 8-bit music, you know, they create harmony by... basically alluding to harmony sometimes by playing a succession of different notes that will create what somebody might think of as the harmony. I mean, that comes from classical music too, you know. In any event, sorry, what are you doing right now, Nicky?
So, you know, all right. You know what? We're a little unsure about, you know, how many channels are on the Super Nintendo. So let's use a lifeline and call, use a phone a friend lifeline. Let's call our older brother Brent, who is an expert on this subject.
On 8-bit and 16-bit era music. And in addition, let's just get his opinion, an expert's opinion on why he likes that kind of music from that era more.
Anyway, Max, why don't you come a little bit closer to me so you can hear the phone call?
Okay.
We're going to call Brent Weinbach right now. Let's try this out here.
Hello.
Hello, Brent.
Yes.
Hi. We're calling from Splitting Hairs with Max and Nicky.
I'm Max.
And I'm Nicky.
And together we're Max and Nicky.
Is Regis there?
No. Max and Nicky are here. Say hi.
Okay. Hi, I was just taking care of business in the BH.
Wow, I mean, you want to broadcast that to the world? Are you okay with that?
Yeah. You're not wondering what the BH is?
I mean, do you want to tell people what that is?
What the BH is?
Yeah.
Well, I'm talking about the bathroom. Bathroom.
I get it. It's funny because it's like
It's
not even the actual initials.
Instead of BR, it's like bathroom.
Bathroom.
Or bathroom.
Bathroom.
Okay.
Anyway, we're calling you because we wanted just an expert's opinion about sort of the evolution of 8-bit video game music to 16-bit video game music. And, right now we're talking about sort of the 16-bit era, and we just want to make a more of a definitive answer on...
Hold on 1 second. You said you wanted a sexpert's opinion? Hey, you found the right guy.
Well, Brent, it's more like sex spurt because, like, you spurt out or something.
Well,
yeah, or sex Bert,
Sex.
My name is almost Bert.
Well, I think Sex Ernie, actually.
Well, I think you're more like Sex Vert, as in like the composer Vert.
The composer Vert.
Oh, right. Well, I was thinking to myself, like, sexploit.
Well, we'll definitely sexploit you for sure on this show.
We'll sexploit you. We'll make a sexploitation video, and we'll get Pam Grier online, and it'll be more of a blaxploitation, black sexploitation kind of movie.
Bring it on, bitch. Wait, is this a clean podcast?
I mean, we try to be, yeah, but hey,
Yeah, you can bleep that. You can bleep that. Yeah.
I mean, who's listening anyway? I mean, people who listen.
What?
Actually.
Don't say that, Nicky.
No. I mean, that's not what I meant. Is what I'm saying is, kids aren't really listening to this.
I mean, just some of us, right? I don't know, maybe not.
No, I want kids to listen to this. Then they'll learn something for once in their lives.
Yeah. For once in their godforsaken lives.
Okay, now, Brent, we seriously.
Anyway,
not only did we want a sexpert's opinion on this subject matter, but we also wanted. What did I just say? A sexpert's opinion? Did I say just?
Yeah.
Well, no. Yeah, we do want not only do we want some facts, some clarification, but we also want your opinion as well, because I think that would be good.
So first of all, if you can just verify.
You want my sex opinion?
Yes, we want your sex opinion about this. What I want you to verify that Super Nintendo has 8 channels, right? And they're all sampled. They all are sampled channels, right? For video game music.
They're all sample channels. So Super Nintendo is, like you said, 8 channels, all samples. However, you'll oftentimes will hear them sampling synth sounds or simple sound waves as well.
So what you're saying is
you might think that there is a PSG in there, or FM synth in there, but that's really just a sample of those.
Okay,
now, let me ask you
those
this.
who don't know what Brent's talking about, he's basically talking about there's synthesized sounds. We talked a little bit about that before, and you might think that there's a synthesizer in the Super Nintendo, but they actually sampled those particular sounds.
Now, let me ask you this. Was the sampler somewhat crude, and that's what kind of creates sort of the video game sound? Because they are samples, but I mean...
I mean, the sampler in the Super Nintendo is not that really that...
Well, I guess it's not that crude because, like Star Fox. Star Fox is like that sounds pretty good, right? I mean...
Yeah, I mean, it's not that bad. I mean, it's crude relative to
now.
Sampler of today, but it was pretty nice compared to the sampler that was in the Nintendo,
Sure, but
while we're on the Nintendo subject, can you verify that a lot of video game composers, they didn't really use the sampler that often in Nintendo for 8-bit music?
Well, I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, yes and no. I mean, you hear it in a lot of Sunsoft music, for example. I mean, almost all the Sunsoft games have sampled bass.
Sampled bass, yeah. Okay.
Oh, so, okay.
I was correct about that, though, that they used it for bass.
So clarify that for me. So there were 4 channels on Nintendo.
No, yeah, two square waves, a triangle wave, and a sampler and the white noise. But
so that was 5, though, you just mentioned.
Well, there's 4 channels, but the I guess the white noise is not really considered a channel per se, right? Or is it the sampler that's not really considered a channel?
I guess it's the channel. Yeah, I mean, the channel for something. Yeah.
So I guess there's kind of 5 channels.
There's 5 channels in a way, then.
I mean, you basically get your 2 main, your 3 main, your 3 main
melodic channels, I guess.
Or melody channels or whatever. And then the sampler and then the noise channel as well. Yeah, I could call that a channel. Yeah.
Well, it's certain that is what it would be a channel.
You just basically you add that premium package, you get 5 channels instead of your usual basic cable 4.
Yeah, I mean basically the 5 channels that you get are it's that there's a pulse wave, and then there's Fox, and then there's CBS, NBC, ABC, and
now, how much would it be for me to add on HBO?
Well, that's a premium. That's going to be a premium channel. So that will probably cost you probably $3.99 every trimester.
Well, okay.
And that's why I think
now, do you have any like deals going on right now?
Okay, I mean, come on.
Are there any deals going on right now?
We don't have to keep going on this bit here. I mean, come on.
Well, I don't know what bit you're talking about. 8-bit. Yeah, we are going on an 8-bit, tangent. But sure.
So, what else did you want to ask?
Okay, so I wanted to ask.
Real quick. So what was in the Sega Genesis? What did they use to create music for the Sega Genesis?
There was a synthesizer. Am I correct, right, Brent?
Max says there's a synthesizer.
Yeah.
Yeah, FM synth. Yeah, FM synth. It's a Yamaha FM synth. And it's they had a few different things in the Genesis. There's like a 6-channel. Well, okay, they usually have 5 channels that would do synth, and then a 6th channel that would do sample.
Oh.
And then they also had a PSG in there as well. That's what a Nintendo had, and that would have, I think, 4 channels in it. Which would just do simple sound, usually pulse waves.
Okay, well, let me ask you, what's the difference? What does PSG stand for?
PSG stands for Programmable Sound Generator.
Okay, so let me ask you, what's the difference between that and a synthesizer?
Pulse waves, square waves, and triangle waves.
So it's basically kind of like a synthesizer, right?
Well, it's not as can't get as much variety as a synthesizer.
Right, but it's a basic synthesizer.
Well, I guess it's a little different because I don't even know exactly. I'm not like a full-on expert, but like the FM stands for frequency modulation.
Right.
And so I guess the difference is that it's just a little more complex. FM synth is more complex, where PSG is just they're simple sound waves.
Right. Exactly. Now, while we have you on the line, we want to just get we haven't completely discussed our own opinions yet, but we will in a little bit. But we want to get your opinion about
why you a true sexpert on video games,
music,
video game music,
and video games.
Well, I will say a true sexpert of 8-bit and 16-bit era music. Why you like that kind of particular, what we truly feel is video game music, and why do you prefer that to the current trend of video game music?
Well, because it's most of the stuff that comes out now just sounds like regular music, and it doesn't have a unique sound. I mean, there's a video game. I feel like the video game music genre really more existed in the third and fourth generation.
Okay, so basically what we were talking about, right?
Yeah, because
Next.
like the limitations
created the genre. Is out of these limitations that a genre was born, and because there aren't these limitations anymore, the genre is kind of getting lost.
Well, it's basically okay, there's no difference between that and just straight up.
It almost like created a composition style too.
Right. It's basically like
I like to refer to as like micro songs, where you really feel like within the matter of 20 seconds sometimes to 45 seconds, you hear the whole arc of a piece of music with a beginning, middle, and end that has a climax to it, and climax is expert.
Yeah,
well,
that's expert.
There's a climax to it, and it has like a full arc to it, you know.
Well, that's something
they were kind of like being forced to sort of create these full arc pieces of music
a mini composition basis.
So, what would you say?
But let me just
and it sort of didn't happen afterwards either. Well, I mean, someone does it on purpose, but let
me just say that is something that back in the 12-tone technique days of modern music, Webern actually did that often. This is getting a little heady, I know, but I just want to let people know out there that that's not he would create short compositions, maybe under a minute kind of thing.
By the way, for you listeners, there's a little bit of a weird buzz, and it's because I'm holding my phone up to the microphone so we can hear Brent, but it's creating some weird, signal backlash. But anyway.
Here's the thing about it, though. That's like classical music, right? Well, I don't know. I guess taking like a pop sensibility and putting it in that.
Right. It's like a combination of sort of Baroque meets funk meets sort of pop, I guess, right? And okay, so what would you say to these naysayers that these sort of people that kind of regard video game music as sort of a lesser art form? I used to, as I was explaining or before, my old saxophone teacher, he thought that video game music was kind of a lesser art form because it's just really repetitive. And I like to make the point, that that's what pop music is repetitive. So I don't know.
I think what I would say to them is I think usually people who say that don't really know a lot about video game music, and they just haven't really heard a lot, so they're usually kind of ignorant to video game music. And also, if they're not that, I think sometimes people just have, in the same way that people have facial blindness and stuff, I think sometimes people have trouble, hearing music if they're distracted by the quality, the sound quality or something like that, And I think that some people just, some people don't have as refined an ear and just hear deep noises sometimes when there's actually really good music structurally and compositionally. They can't really hear that because they're sort of,
out with it.
Quality just is,
okay.
blinding them or something.
I mean, geez, we thought we were like a bit of a ramblers, but I mean, shoot. Whew.
Well, he's in his sexpert in field. He's called the Rambler, actually.
I call it a grappler.
What?
I call it a grappler.
The grappler effect,
Okay. Anyway,
thank you for answering our questions, Brent. And if we have any more questions throughout the episode, we'll give you a call back. How about that?
Sounds pretty good.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Brent. Okay, so we just took a brief pause
just
to make sure we weren't
getting our facts straight,
give wrong information.
And I just wanted to say, of course, the sampler was going to be cruder back then. The technology didn't support it. Of course.
Exactly. So basically, and I think that's a big reason why samples back in the 8-bit era were only used mainly for percussive sounds and maybe sometimes bass sounds. But usually composers used those 4, channels, the 2 square waves, the triangle wave, and the white noise.
That's why like sometimes in movies now, composers, the samples have gotten so good that sampled sounds, I'm talking about just straight up movies now, but like sampled violins and things like that. Some composers will even use that now, and they'll bypass the orchestra. And
not even just movies, but a lot of times pop music will use sampled drum sounds, and it sounds exactly like an actual drum kit playing, but through some EQing manipulation, it's made to sound real, even though it's actually all sampled sounds.
Sure, but there's a whole thing about that too, programming velocities and whatnots and what it was and stuff like that,
Anyway, so in Super Nintendo, when that hit, the 16-bit era, it was basically the video game composers dealt with 8 channels of sampled sounds. That was their basis for creating the music. But they
Can I just say something? I just wanted to say, people have been using sampled sounds for movie scores for a long time. I'm talking about big budget movies. Sometimes will even use it. Like Hans Zimmer uses that sometimes now too. Anyway, I just wanted to clarify.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what you're looking at. I mean,
because sometimes in the 80s,
like Vangelis used a lot of synthesizer sounds.
Well, that's synthesizers. Sure. Different. I'm talking about like maybe like. I mean, like something like the Re-Animator or something like that. I think that
not
uses
even that, but a
samples.
lot of 80s music in general used like, I mean, I guess drum machines are essentially sampled drums, right? Or are they just synthesized sounds?
They're synthesized
sounds.
sounds.
Okay, well then what am I saying? Okay.
I think.
Oh God, that's just a whole other world that we shouldn't be. I don't know. We shouldn't be talking about this because we don't know it.
I'm sure they use samples too. Actually, yeah. I don't know. I'm not quite sure about these things.
Okay. Anyway,
so.
we're veering off topic. The point is, Super Nintendo, they had it was a totally different kind of thing where they used these sampled 8 channels instead of these variations on the sine waves, these 4 channels, 2 square waves and a triangle wave,
or white noise,
Yeah. And but because it was a crude sampler, it still sounded
like there was something about it that still, and I think they were still being influenced in the same kind of, because Nintendo created a sort of a genre, kind of a quality to the music.
The genre that was video game music.
It has a certain quality to it.
Not just Nintendo, but video game systems of that era.
Right, video game systems of that era. I think
think Nintendo had a lot to do with it, though.
I think Nintendo did have a lot to do with it. Who created Mario?
Oh my gosh, jeez, how do you not know that?
I forget.
That is Koji Kondo.
No, but he was the same guy who composed Mario too?
Oh, who created
yeah.
Shigeru Miyamoto.
That's right. That's what we're trying to differentiate. Okay. So Koji Kondo, by the way, he has a lot to do actually with creating video game genre actually, because before that, people weren't thinking on that level of creating an actual an actual piece of work actually,
Right. And in fact, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here, but there was this highly respected classical composer in Japan. He was, before video games, he was a well-respected composer in the classical music world, and he was maybe in his 50s when, the Nintendo, or in Japan, the Famicom came out, and he heard some of the music and thought, oh, I want to try my hand at writing some video game music, writing music for a video game. And so he became the lead composer for the Dragon Quest series of video games, also called Dragon Warrior, I believe. And basically he became even more popular in the video game world for writing music for those games than he was in the classical music world. But he definitely had a background in classical music, and you can hear it in that music, which but also adds to the sort of evolution of video game music is that some of it sounds a lot like classical or Baroque music, actually.
Sure, but it should be noted, though, also that some of these guys who did create video game music did not have a background in classical music.
Sure.
And they actually were... Back then, also, the composers had to program it themselves, too, right? Is that,
right.
Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah.
And so they actually... And that's something else that's different from now, by the way, which we'll get to, is a lot of people that are hired to compose video game music now don't have to know programming at all.
I mean, I wrote the music to the intro of this podcast. I didn't...
You did it yourself.
Though. I did it through sounds on Logic.
That's right.
I didn't actually
program the sound.
I didn't actually program the sounds. I didn't know any coding to do it, you know?
Right. So but anyway, in any event, so that's an interesting aspect about video game music from back in the past. But in addition to that, some of these guys, it's almost as if they started to have to learn because of the constraints. They had to, and it kind of they had to learn how they kind of learned how
classical composition
or how Baroque composers composed in a
Counterpoint
way.
was a big part.
Counterpoint was a big part of Baroque music and on later on, but especially in Baroque music, Counterpoint is what is Counterpoint, by the way? I know we're getting a little heady again. It's basically just the ability to use different voicings and stuff at the same time, like two or more voices going at the same time. Basically, it's kind of
usually it's like there's a main melody and you have another melody kind of going on at the same time. That's sort of countering it, if you will.
Right. So it's counterpoint, basically.
Counterpoint.
And so the idea here is that they kind of, because of the constraints, they were creating melodies against other melodies. And so it kind of had this classical feel, but not being quite, it's not exactly classical at the same time,
And, there were other people that had influence on these early video game music sounds. I mean, we were just before recording this podcast, we were listening to one of our favorite composers, Ryuichi Sakamoto, who wrote the music to The Last Emperor and amongst other films. And we were listening to...
and he's part of a famous Japanese...
so I was going to get to that. And just like, he was a part of a group called the Yellow Magic Orchestra.
And they had a big influence on electronic music.
They had a big influence not only on electronic music, it was an electronic dance music band, essentially pop band, J-pop band, if you will. Not just J-pop, but they were from Japan, and they were very popular, and they had a large influence on video game music. If you listen to some of their music, it sounds like video game music.
Right.
And so we were just listening to this Ryuichi Sakamoto, who is clearly classically trained. I mean, this solo album of his is filled with piano works that sound straight up like Claude Debussy.
Right. We weren't even, by the way, it
sounds like impressionist music.
It's kind of happenstance that Nicky decided to listen to that before we decided to do this particular podcast. It's just kind of funny that, it has. We were like thinking ourselves when we were listening to something like this. Straight up sounds like a video game song.
It inspired me to want to talk more about Ryuichi Sakamoto's influence on video game music. Or seemingly.
So that's true. That's a true thing. Like composers have cited Ryuichi Sakamoto.
No. I mean, I don't know if that's an actual fact, but that does seem to be like. It really seems to be evident that that's the case. Well, I think maybe the composers have cited him. I'm not sure. Maybe that.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure about that, but certainly, one can make the case. If. I'm not quite sure about this myself, but one can argue that, though, if anything, they were in the, in the scene, at the time.
Well, here's the thing: is video game music and video game composers are a lot more celebrated in Japan than they are in America. I mean, some of them are like superstars, like Nobuo Uematsu, who did all the Final Fantasy music up until like Final Fantasy 12.
Well, he's becoming very celebrated in America too.
Sure, there are these concerts going on right now all over the world. They're like actual orchestral renditions of video game music, and a lot of orchestras are doing are performing Nobuo Uematsu's
and that's something we'll get
music.
to in a bit about some academians might point their nose upward to that kind of stuff. That's the saying, right?
I don't know. It just video game music might be too lowbrow for them.
Yeah, they might think like, oh, it's a class. It's an orchestra, and they're orchestrating this video game music, but they don't realize that this video game music is quite genius and on par, if not even better than some of these.
As I just said, even
this academic world music.
Classical composer wrote music for video games.
Right.
I remember I was telling my old saxophone teacher about my sort of affinity for video game music, and he even kind of scoffed at it and said, yeah, but it's just, it's kind of repetitive, isn't it? And, after a while, and first of all, some of it doesn't repeat for like a long while.
Oh, there's a song called Outrun.
Right.
From the video game Outrun on Genesis.
Well, it's not just on Genesis, but...
Oh, it's okay.
I think there's an arcade version, or it might have been on Sega Master System too. But
that goes on for like a real long time, like
before it repeats.
Right, that's like a straight up.
But the point is,
yeah. By the way, point your nose upward. I'm getting that. That is a saying, but I'm not quite saying it quite right.
Who cares at this point?
I'm just saying. So I just don't want to make you seem like
I don't even care actually.
Okay,
but here the point is. Well, this is not the point, but. So I argued, well, pop songs are repetitive too, aren't they? I told him, so in a way, video game music kind of melded, sort of the genres of pop music and classical music and computer technology to create its own genre, essentially.
Right. Well, and it's not all like it's not all classical sounding. Like Super Mario Brothers has like a sort of a samba-ish kind of situation going.
Beat.
Right, which is interesting, but it uses a lot of counterpoint that is very much like a, like this.
But then
style
there's music like from the Zelda games or something like that.
Very,
it's like a John Williams.
It's like a John Williams.
I really honestly feel like John Williams might be one of the biggest influences on
could be
8-bit and 16-bit video game music. But so if you listen, we played. A track from Star Fox, the video game Star Fox. And this is when samplers, this is on Super Nintendo, and it's when samplers were kind of getting pretty sort of good, actually. They weren't quite so crude.
Wait, and Super Nintendo?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. We played it, my older brother and I played the main theme to Star Fox for our mom. And she was like, "Oh, what is this? Is this like?"
You're right. You're right.
She's like, "What movie is this from?"
It sounded kind of good. Yeah, at that point.
She was like, "What movie is this from?" She's like, "It sounds like John Williams." And we told her, "Actually, Mom, it's video game music." And because beforehand she was scoffing at video game music, and she also kind of belittled it and sort of undermined the quality and the potential for video game music. And when we played her this, she was surprised to hear that it was actually video game music. It was a video game song, and it was the sounds. It wasn't just a video game song. It was actually straight from the video game. It was the actual sounds that you hear in the video game. So she was fooled into thinking that it was actually a real orchestration. So in a way, the samples had gotten, by that point, good enough to fool somebody like her mom, at least.
Right. I mean, but, she's kind of,
Well, anyway, but, I mean, I guess we could tell, obviously, their samples. But the song does straight up sound like a John Williams song, no doubt. I mean, it really does.
It's very good, though.
It's really,
Star
really
Fox,
good. It's really good. But that song, that video game song seems to be like the biggest evidence of being influenced by John Williams, of video game music being.
By the way, it's not just that, but also obviously there's a big influence. You were talking about pop and also like maybe rock too.
Oh,
like
Megaman.
Like listen to Megaman. Actually, Megaman has
funk too.
Right,
funky
Megaman
music.
has a lot of different kind of genres. Even it has a lot of stylistic.
Anyway, it depends
styles going on in that.
It depended on the composer,
song. Well, that's an interesting thing. Megaman had multiple composers composing for it. Isn't that right? Am I correct?
I don't think you're right about that.
No, I think I'm right about that.
I don't know.
I want to pause.
We're going to call Brent Weinbach right now. Hello,
Okay, Brent.
Thanks for
picking up again.
This is our second lifeline here. You know, I mean.
You're welcome, Max and Nicky.
Okay. Okay.
We wanted to verify something, we wanted to ask basically. So in Megaman, did they have multiple composers for that, or did they have just one composer?
Or maybe different sequels to Megaman had
how did it go?
Composers. What's up with that? And
the original Megamans that were on Nintendo, it was only one composer per game. For the most part, Part 3, Megaman 3 originally had one composer, but she had to leave because she got pregnant, so her husband took over. But essentially, it was just one composer per game from Mega Man 1 through 6. And then I think there's multiple composers on the Nintendo one.
And like Part 10, I believe, had multiple composers on that. But what about Mega Man? Who wrote Mega Man 1?
Mega Man 1 was Manami Matsume.
Okay, is she known for any other video games?
That's her most well-known. She actually contributed to the Shovel Knight soundtrack more recently.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good soundtrack, right?
I mean, it was primarily Vert, who you mentioned earlier.
Right. Vert. Sex Vert.
I mean, the majority of it was Vert, but she did contribute some, though.
So we were talking about...
I think she only did like one track or something.
Now, some of your favorite video game composers are women, which we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, half of the composers during that era were women.
Right. In Japan. Right.
Yeah.
So what?
By the way, Manami Matsume, by the way,
mm-hmm.
I mean, she also, I don't know, she actually did do some music to Mega Man 10, and she also arranged the NES version of Legendary Wings, but she didn't compose the original arcade version. And she also did the music to UN Squadron also, and she did some music to Fire also.
I mean, ladies and gentlemen, is this not a true sexpert or what? Anyway, so who are some of your other favorite female composers? I mean, from video game music. I mean, I know you got Junko Tamiya. You like her a lot.
She's one of the best. I mean, not just one of my favorite female composers, but she's one of my favorite composers.
No, right.
Period.
I know, but what Nicky was saying was, what are some of your favorite composers who happen to be women? Is what I think he was trying to say.
Right.
I mean, yeah, Junko Tamiya, and she did music to Gunsmoke, and she did Street Fighter 2010, and she did Little Nemo the Dream Master.
Wait, just to clarify here, Street Fighter 2010, that's different from Street Fighter 2010. Wait, I'm sorry.
So basically, it's a Street Fighter game that came out in 2010.
No, I know, but there's I think 3 games with the name Street Fighter in it, right, or something like that.
Hey, what?
Isn't there like Street Fighter 2010 Final Fight or something like that?
Yeah, Street Fighter 2010, the Final Fight. Yeah.
That's different from Street Fighter 2010, right?
No, that's the same game.
No, it's the same game. But it is. I'm trying to remember. Actually, there is.
No, but okay.
That has nothing to do. That has nothing to do with like
Street Fighter
2
or Street Fighter.
Actually, I believe it does. Actually.
Oh.
Sort of, right? But there's also Final Fight.
I used to know this and I kind of forgot, but it's a while since I knew about this. But
there's also Final Fight, right?
I think it wasn't that they were trying to make. Oh man, I'm trying to remember actually.
So Brent, there's also Final Fight, the video game, right?
Yeah, there's a game called Final Fight. Actually, Final Fight was supposed to be connected. I think it was originally called Street Fighter 89, actually.
Oh, my God.
So basically, that's what I'm saying. There's like 3 different kinds of games that we're talking about here. There's Street Fighter 2010 Final Fight, there's Final Fight, and there's also Street Fighter, the well-known series of games.
Oh, man, I can look this up for you right now. I kind of forgot. It's kind of funny and weird, but they're all kind of connected. I mean, it's all Capcom.
Well, it's not.
We'll invite our listeners to look that up for themselves.
What else did Junko Tamiya do, though? By the way,
she did Strider for Genesis.
That's a very interesting.
Oh, and Strider is a very interesting composition. For all you naysayers out there for video game music, take a listen to Strider. Now that is,
for all
pushing
you
the limits.
Sort of classical music hotheads, take a listen to the soundtrack to Strider, and maybe that'll change your mind.
Yeah, that's a good soundtrack. She was amazing. She's like very interesting, kind of experimental, and she's one of the best. She's someone who happens to be female, and Soya Oka is another one who's really great.
Say that again.
The Pilot Wings.
Can you say that name again?
Oh, Pilot Wings. That's got one of the best.
Can you say that again, Brent? The name?
Soya Oka.
Soya Oka. Pilot Wings.
Pilot Wings, and she did Super Mario Kart.
Oh, well, those are two of the best video game soundtracks of all time.
Now, did Super Mario Kart, was that all the same composer for all the levels?
Well, pretty much, except for some of the music was reused from Super Mario World, which is composed by Koji Kondo.
Well, right.
But aside from that reused, repurposed music, it was all Soya Oka, yeah.
I just heard you pronounce it Koji Kondo, not Kondo.
No, I think that's how you would pronounce it, Kondo.
Is it Kondo? Okay,
well,
I just clarified.
You just made me remember, we were talking about Raishi Sakamoto earlier and the Yellow Magic Orchestra.
Ryuichi Sakamoto?
I thought it was Ryushi.
Ryuichi.
Is it Ryushi?
Ryuchi.
Oh, well, then I guess I was pronouncing it wrong before. Ryushi Sakamoto. Because...
that's okay. A lot of people say, from Street Fighter 2, Ryu, but it's actually supposed to be Ryu or something like that.
Well, anyway...
Call it what you will.
Anyway, my point is, we were listening to that album you got me for Christmas right before we recorded this podcast, and that one track on it, Tong Poo, it's called, so good. But it really sounds like a video game song in a lot of ways. But anyway, the point is, do you agree that possibly that Ryuichi Sakamoto and maybe the Yellow Magic Orchestra had a big influence on the development of video game music?
I think so.
It sounds like it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, there you go.
You heard it here first.
You heard it here first.
Brent Weinbach
Other
agrees.
Female composers that are good. I mean,
Nicky Weinbach.
Yeah. I mean, as we said before, Nicky Weinbach composed the intro music to this podcast, and
Yoko Shimomura did the music to Street Fighter 2. Nicky Weinbach, who's a good female composer.
Yeah.
Okay, you just repeated what we said.
Nikki Taylor, she's a model.
She's a model, which is kind of rare.
Yeah.
What was that?
What?
What was
that?
What was what?
Sound like a plate or something.
Oh yeah, that was a lid to some peanut butter.
Well, it sounds like Brent's in the middle of eating while he's talking with us. So.
Oh, I'm just having a little snack over here. I like peanut butter. Yummy.
I like peanut butter too, actually, and jelly myself.
What about almond butter, though? I like almond butter.
I'm kind of back into that peanut butter tip.
I like peanut butter. I like peanut butter cups, but that almond butter.
So, what else do you want to ask me?
Well, I mean, I guess that's it for now, unless you think of is there anything you want to add to this discussion in general?
There's so many female composers. It's amazing.
Well, I mean, yeah, we don't have to go through every female composer.
Can you
but the point is that
I did want clarification on something. Was the prevalence of female composers, is that very much a Japanese thing, or did we have a few female composers in America as well?
I don't know. I mean, there weren't really many American composers around this time.
Right, in general.
But,
okay.
I mean, there were some, but yeah, I don't really.
Now,
really
do you know? Do you know if these female composers were in Japan were highly regarded and well respected in much the same way as a Nobuo Uematsu or a Koji Kondo? Yoko
Shimomura, who did Street Fighter 2, she's pretty perspective.
Who did Kingdom Hearts?
She's up there with like Nobuo Uematsu.
Did she do Kingdom Hearts?
Yeah, she's kind of better known for that, probably.
Right.
Well,
right.
no, not better known for that, but like, I mean, that's a franchise that is beyond.
That's a current, sort of a current, more recent franchise that's maybe gained some popularity.
And just one other question: how are video game composers viewed in Japan relative to like film composers or classical composers
in the Western world?
In the Western world.
I don't understand the question.
So, Max is trying to ask, are video game composers in Japan as highly regarded as Western film composers?
In the West.
Well, in the West. The way we respect film composers is...
I don't know. I don't know, actually. Maybe. I mean, I think that Nobuo Uematsu is pretty highly regarded, like, in the same way that a movie can put, like...
Is Nobuo Uematsu like the John Williams for video game music to you?
I mean, Nobuo Uematsu, absolutely.
Right.
But, you know, I mean, is he...
My question is, like, if you...
John Williams in Japan? I don't know, maybe not on the level of John Williams, but pretty up there, yeah.
And would you agree also with what I said earlier that John Williams probably had a lot of influence on video game music, right? Do you think that's true?
I think everything probably had an influence. I think everything has an influence on video game music, you know?
Right, but like Star Fox, that straight up sounds like a John Williams song, right?
Yeah, but I think that you can probably hear influences of everything in video game music. You hear the Beatles, you know, can be an influence.
Like that's that track that sounds like Come Together.
Yeah, I mean, straight up. I mean, it's from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on Nintendo, and but not just that. But
wasn't there a track that sounded like Beauty and the Beast too?
Well, that's just I mean, some of these just kind of sound like these tracks, but
right.
Well, there's the game Earthbound, though. I mean, that's very influenced by the Beatles. Well, not very, but there's definitely some Beatles influence.
Do you like the soundtrack to Earthbound?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty quirky, and there's definitely some really cool tracks.
But you think that that's one of the best games of all time, right?
It's definitely really up there.
Would you say that's top 10 material?
Role-playing game. It's probably the best role-playing game I've ever played.
You mean turn-based role-playing game, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Because what would Secret of Mana be considered? What kind of game is that? Is that a role-playing game?
It's called an action. That's an action RPG.
So, but you like Earthbound more than Secret of Mana? Is that what you're telling me?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I probably have more. I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, Earthbound's a really amazing experience.
Well, you heard it here first, folks.
No. Secret of Mana.
I mean, think about how much fun we had playing Secret of Mana. Just
it was like one of my favorite games. But
thinking about how much fun we had playing Secret of Mana, the three of us, and just waiting every night that summer so the glare would get off the television so we could play that game. I mean, that was so much fun. 3-player simultaneous.
Right. I mean, Secret of Mana is amazing. But I don't know. Earthbound's definitely more of a quirkier, kind of has more of a independent feel to it, you know.
It's like an indie rock.
It kind of feels that way, actually.
Right.
Very quirky, very unique game. You know?
All right.
There's nothing like it, really. You know?
Right.
All right. Well, you heard it here.
I highly recommend that experience because it's so. It takes you on a really cool, amazing trip. You know. But no, I think overall, I like Secret Mana more than Earthbound.
Okay.
Just because gameplay wise, I just prefer action more than turn-based.
Oh my dear Lord! Okay.
Oh my God.
Well, you heard it here
God,
first, ladies and gentlemen.
Spaghetti.
That is Brent Weinbach's 2 cents on the whole subject. And
well, is there anything else you wanted to add, Brent, real quick? You know,
well, you just asked that.
No, I mean
this is what he was adding.
No, he wasn't. That's not what he was adding.
You asked that same question.
Wrong.
I can talk about video games.
Wrong.
Days. I mean, you just ask me, I'll go. You know?
I know. Well, I think that's about it for right now. I think we've used up our lifeline for sure. I think.
Yeah, maybe we used up the third one too.
I don't want to be used up. You can keep using me.
Well, you're the sexpert.
Well,
you know best. I mean, you're the sexpert. So, what?
I'm the sex slave.
All right, Brent. Well, thank you for joining us, Brent. That was Brent Weinbach, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, I was just going to say one last thing.
Oh, okay. Never mind then.
People get influenced all from different stuff. For example, Koji Tanaka, who did the music to Kid Icarus, Metroid, and a lot of...
that's a good that you brought that up, because especially Metroid...
He's very influenced by reggae, and you hear the reggae influence a lot.
A reggae beat.
Yeah, but just so you know, Metroid is very experimental at times, very experimental. So you know, really, naysayers.
I mean, I know Hirohito Tanaka did those games, but it's hard for me to hear the reggae influence in Kid Icarus. I mean, what?
Well, maybe not so much in Kid Icarus and Metroid, but if you listen to Balloon Fight or Gyromite or even Earthbound, and worked on Earthbound or Mother. I mean, the reggae is very strong there. I mean, especially with Balloon Fight or Gyromite. Just check them out. Or even Wrecking Crew, kind of. Well, sort of, yeah. But, no, you can definitely hear... or Dr. Mario also. You can just really hear the reggae.
Well, yeah, Dr. Mario. All right, then.
Well, you heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen.
All right. Okay.
All right, thank you, Brent, for participating in this episode of Splitting Hairs. And anyway, let's move on.
You're welcome, Max and Nicky.
And all right, bye, Brent. Bye, Brent. Anyway, so here's an interesting thing to note, actually, is that a lot of video game composers, even today in Japan, are female. And that is a very, very different from our Western culture in general of music composer, classical composers. You don't hear
incorrect.
No,
incorrect.
It's not incorrect at all. Can you name one female film composer?
No, I'm not talking about. You're talking about composers now in our Western world. Currently, in our current situation, I think. Well, that is true. Film composers. I don't know. I can't.
No, you can't even name a female.
But I can name people in the academic world. Yes.
Well, yes, but even that is more rare than it. It does seem to be a male-dominated world.
Yeah,
Western
I know, but you're
classical
talking about,
music in general. Western orchestral music.
No, but what you're saying right now is that's a Western world thing. I think this is just uniquely specific to video game music, is what you're talking about. Well, because I'm not quite sure.
No. It is because. I don't think there's really. I can't think of any female American video game composers. But Japan.
Well, there's not
at least half of the video game composers in Japan are female, which is really, really interesting. Like Junko Tamiya, for example, or God, for some reason names are eluding me right now. But the point is, it's really, really interesting that these women are kind of sort of they're co-dominating with men in the video game world in Japan.
I know, but what I'm saying,
you don't hear that, and you don't hear about female composers that often in the Western world.
But no, you don't. I know. I'm saying video game music is relatively a new thing. I'm saying compared to the history of music, relative to the history of music. So in other words, what you're talking about is specific to only video game music. Composers in general, what we think about when we think about composers in the Western world are just, Western world composers. We don't even think about Japanese composers or composers from other countries like the Eastern world at all,
Right. Well, in general, I mean,
so in other words,
we just talked about Reishi Sakamoto, who is one of our favorite composers.
I know, but again, that's a modern thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, very rare. I mean, there's only like maybe one or two female composers I can name from the classical world. Like Clara Schumann and who ended up, her husband overshadowed her. His legacy overshadowed her, although she was much more popular in her time than he was. Anyway, there's also in addition, but I was going to say, sorry. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more female composers though now in our current situation though in the Western world, I should say.
However, you can't even name one female.
Cindy Cox.
No, you can't name one female film composer.
No, he's true.
That's true.
Film is different. It's a different situation. But
that is sort of the orchestral music that we recognize today. I think
that is not true, dude.
That is popular.
Okay, that's the orchestral music that we recognize.
That is popular because it is in movies.
Okay, fair enough. That's popular. Yes.
Okay, no, an average Joe is not going to know who Cindy Cox is, whereas an average Joe back in the late 1800s, they would know who Beethoven was for sure.
What? That's not a good example.
Or not? They would know who.
No, you're just saying
they would know. They would know who Claire. They would know who.
They'll say you're saying
Strauss was or something like that.
That's not the correct analogy you're making. You should say an average Joe won't know who Cindy Cox is, but the average Joe will know who John Williams is. That's what you should.
No. That's not what I'm saying. Is that the average Joe is not going to know who Cindy Cox is because classical music is not popular today anymore. But back then that was the popular music, so people would know who a Claude Debussy was. They were nationally recognized. But today nationally recognized composers are film composers.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Well, it's a different situation we live in actually because the idea of popular music became a situation. A different thing, like in the 20s, like with the advent of recordings, actually,
recorded music,
things changed completely.
Sure. Also, the advent of blues music, of rock and roll.
Because this is why I'll explain why. Because the people that wrote down their music back in the day, before recorded music, were composers, and the folk traditional music and stuff that you would hear, that stuff was usually not written down, and so. That's how those composers became famous, is because people would buy that sheet music and take it home. Beethoven became like the first superstar kind of composer, actually.
Although I would say, Stephen Foster, I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe he wrote down some of his music, but he was a folk sort of music artist. But
I could be wrong about this, but I think there's a lot of tunes that he didn't get royalties for because he didn't, there was a copywriting situation. I don't think he got royalties for a lot of his songs.
By the way, Stephen Foster, he wrote like a lot of the tunes like, Home
Susanna,
on the Range, Oh Susanna,
Camptown Races,
or what is it? Was that Beautiful Dreamer or something like that?
Is that him?
That is him.
Okay.
That is him.
In any event, we're getting off subject here. The point is, recording music changed a whole different thing. Although Gershwin, Gershwin was a big situation.
Saying we're getting off subject. This is not even the subject.
Sorry.
Anyway, so basically you had 16-bit video game music. That was sampled music, and you heard music like from Secret of Mana, which is our favorite video game of all time, actually, or Final Fantasy IV and 5 and 6, which also have really, really great video game soundtracks. Anyway, I don't know. I'm just naming a few.
Well, he's just... But, okay, we're not explaining... So anyway, why do we like those songs more?
Well, hold on. Just real quick. Nintendo 64 came about, and PlayStation, and some of the music still kind of sometimes it had a video game sound, but they were really losing sight of what the video game music genre was.
Right, and they were kind of...
even Mario 64, even though some of the music is good, it is some of it sounds like new agey, and it doesn't necessarily sound like video game music.
Right, and I think part of that, as we said, was the actual constraints that they had and the quality of the sounds themselves too.
Really created that genre.
They kind of created that genre. It was the timbre, basically.
And people, when they weren't so constrained, they lost sight of the genre of video game music. And so today, basically, a lot of video game composers, they'll just write music as if they're writing
like
music
film score,
like a film score.
Yeah.
And they don't write music for a video game. They just write music for just a piece of art.
And a lot of times those video games actually, they kind of have these sequences in between the gameplay that look like movies anyway.
Yeah, they're like movies, and a lot of them are
and
just
that's
not
also
very
that's
good.
a whole nother subject.
That's a whole
is
nother
like,
subject is video game, the evolution of video games themselves.
Yeah, it's like, why you're taking so much time.
This isn't
on.
there are certain video games that are coming out today that
They're
are truly
really
revolutionary,
cool.
and they're really
cool. And by the way, some haven't lost sight to, like, okay, there's a video game called Wario Land Shake
Well, no,
It. Okay.
I'm going to stop you because I was going to mention it. I think the music to Wario Land Shake It is really good, but I would argue that some of it just doesn't quite sound like video game music.
Well, it has an interesting thing, like as if, I kind of feel like it has a video game quality to it that, as if...
By the way, Wario Land Shake It came out for the Nintendo Wii.
The Nintendo Wii. It's a very good game.
But it's a side-scroller.
It's a side-scroller, and it kind of has a classic video
Super
game.
Nintendo play,
It's almost as if they took the idea of Super Nintendo and ran with that and kept and they
evolved those graphics instead of trying to make things look real.
But so on the same token,
by the same token,
or on the same ticket.
No, that's not a saying. I don't think so. No.
By the same token, I think the music, if they took like Super Nintendo style music and they evolved that, I feel like that's what Wario Land Shake It would be.
Sure.
And that's why I think it still has a video game quality sound to it.
And the game Shovel Knight, which has become kind of popular, that also is like as if, those side-scroller or those kinds of graphics from Super Nintendo evolved, and this is what it would be like today. Shovel Knight's a really cool game, too, and the music is cool, too.
Anyway, there were still some stuff, though, Nintendo 64 that has a kind of video game quality to it.
But anyway, today, we don't need to talk about that so much, but today, the point is, by today, a lot of the music out there is either just sounding like movie music, a lot of it's boring, actually. A lot of it's like atmospheric music, which I really hate. It's almost like they're trying to sound like Hans Zimmer or something. I don't know. Well, but I'm not a big fan of Hans Zimmer, by the way. Although some of his music from the 80s is kind of cool, actually.
Well, actually, here, hold on, T.O.
Like he did the music to Driving Miss Daisy, which is kind of
hold on. Good, some of it atmospheric music can be cool. Like, Echo the Dolphin kind of that's from the Genesis. That kind of has like an atmospheric quality to it. And that's kind of cool.
Or even Donkey Kong Country, actually, from Super Nintendo has like a new agey feel on some of it.
Well, that's a new agey feel. That's not necessarily atmospheric. It has a...
Oh, right. It's not atmospheric.
Wait, is Echo the Dolphin, though? That is more of an atmospheric thing, right?
I don't know about that. I would say it's more new agey.
Oh, fair enough. No, but is there a melody on those?
I can't remember.
I can't remember myself. But we're not going to pause.
Echo the Dolphin, it's a cool game. The graphics are really cool. Sega Genesis.
Okay, in any event, so I guess the reason why we like 8-bit and 16-bit era music more is because that really kind of captured the actual, what we think is a real genre of music, you know what I mean? And it's not, I hate to sound like we're purists.
It's not even that, though. We are big sticklers for melody. We place a high standard on a song or just anything being melodic and what we think is catchy. And if you're not leaving the game, or if you're not leaving the movie, if you're not leaving the theater humming the tunes, then the music wasn't that great, I don't think, sometimes. a lot of the times, And so it seemed like melody was really important for video game composers during the 8-bit and 16-bit era, and you didn't have as much atmospheric music as you do now, and I think that's a reason why.
Again, the reason for that is the constraints. I think on 8-bit, especially on the 8-bit,
right,
it had to be melodic basically.
Right.
Otherwise, they can't really create atmospheric kind of stuff back then. So they had to be melodic,
Right. And why is it that Japanese composers were creating the better video game music? I mean, that seems to be true for the most part, although the music to the video game Pictionary is a really, really cool drawing game. Oh, so good. And it was written by, I think, a British composer. But, there were composers in America and England, but, this kind of supports my whole thought that the Japanese are really good at improving upon American invention. I mean, they take music like John Williams type music and they make it even better sometimes.
Like what?
Like the video game music that you hear in Star Fox. It's better than the video game music you'd hear from American composers for the most part.
I mean, but you're saying then they're making it better than John Williams stuff. And I don't know if that's necessarily true.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Or no, but in general, Japanese made cars are the best made cars around.
I know, but they used to not be though.
But now they are.
I know, but
Toyotas and Hondas,
I know, but basically, I mean, yeah, it's a different story, but they've had time to grow though. You know what I'm saying? In other words, you're saying that what you were saying was that they've improved immediately. They improved upon it. And, Toyotas from the 80s are really, they're cheap and, easy to make, but they can get broken into easily, and they weren't, they're cheap, But nowadays, shoot, Japanese cars all the way, I think.
By the way, I just remembered the name. It's Tim Fallon was the guy who did the music to Pictionary, and he is British, and he was only 20 years old when he wrote the music to that. A lot of these composers were very young when they wrote the music to these, classic games. I mean, obviously Pictionary is not, it's more classic as a board game or social game rather than a video game, but
anyway, so what else did we not go over here? I guess we went over, so this is why there's more melody back in the day.
But I have a lot more respect for the genre of video game music because these people created such beautiful work under these restrictions,
Right.
That's a really cool thing.
But not only that,
I gain more respect having to write and record that kind of stuff for this podcast, actually.
But not only that, they also have to often program it themselves too, which is that's crazy.
And they don't have to do that anymore.
No, they don't have to do that anymore. And on top of that, you're talking about respect for it, but why do we like it more? Again, it's, I guess when it comes to video game music, for instance, jazz, there's jazz purists out there, and they think straight ahead jazz, that's the only jazz I'll like. Wynton Marsalis is often, considered that kind of guy, who's anything beyond, he doesn't like fusion or anything like that. I'm not that way for jazz. If it just sounds good, then it sounds good. But as far as video game music goes, for me, I think I'm a purist because otherwise it just doesn't become video game music anymore.
Well, here's the thing,
right?
I think some of the music that is made for video games today is good.
That's true.
It's good, but it's not necessarily what I would consider a part of the video game music genre. The canon, I guess.
I guess, if you will.
And so
right, that's
there's
true.
A problem with that.
I guess, here's the deal. I like some of the music that comes out now, but I don't know if I would categorize that as video game music.
That's just exactly what I said.
I know.
Basically.
I'm just repeating it, and I'm just saying, I suppose though, then, if that's the case, then who cares, right? Does it need to sound like video game music? According to us, does it matter?
Well, I think it's important to preserve that kind of genre.
Okay, but just like Wynton Marsalis with jazz.
Here's the thing, though. This is kind of relating to my problem with modern day musical theater music, is that it's losing sight of a lot of the musicals that are coming out today. The music that's in the musicals just sounds like mainstream, generic pop music. And
that's right.
There's musical theater composers are losing sight of the actual genre of musical theater music. And there's a certain genre to that. There's a certain sound to the music from West Side Story
But that's evolved. Stephen Sondheim sounds completely different.
There's something about it, though, that still sounds like
there's a musical theater. Yes.
But the music, and we talked about this in the past, but there's a musical from the 90s that really paved the way in a bad way, paved the way for this mainstream generic pop to be inserted into modern day musical theater. And it's once in a while you'll get some good musicals like La La Land, which does have classic sounding, even though some of it sounds a little bit more modern, but it sounds like musical music, and it's good. It's melodic, and it's catchy, and it's good.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess it's like...
I know we already had an episode about musicals.
So I guess what you're saying is, okay, that's for musicals, though. It's a little bit different because you're saying, why am I going to the theater, though? Part of the reason I'm going to see a musical is for the music, right? But that's not necessarily why somebody might play a video game, though. You know what I'm saying? They're not playing a video game necessarily for the music. You know what I'm saying?
That adds to the experience, though.
It adds to the experience, for sure. But what I'm saying is...
I can recall times where we were in the middle of a video game and we're like, just put it on pause because the music will still play on pause. And we're like, just put it on pause. Let's just listen to the music for real quick. This is so good.
In other words, okay, here's what you said before, Warrior Lounge Shake It. Some of it doesn't have that video game quality to it, is what you argued. But yet you still groove to it. It's still good, and it still gets you into the game, right?
Yeah.
So but because of that, though, I argue that it is like video game music, but it's more like modern day video game music. So I argue that it is more like the genre that we're thinking of, but it's
But the genre we're thinking of also has a lot of emphasis on melody, which Warrior Lounge Shake It does. And a lot of these games that are coming out today.
Hold on, there is a song from Warrior Lounge Shake It that doesn't really have a melody, but it has this certain groove to it, this feel that is, as a friend has put it in the past, it's melodious. But it has this sort of like... That's
the Lion King one, or what?
I guess it kind of has a sort of a Lion King feel to it, but it has this sort of this groove to it that's cool,
But the point is, we keep saying the point is. I don't know. I guess that's just the way we speak. Video game composers should place more emphasis on melody. As should any composer, any songwriter. There should be a higher standard for melody and songwriting. Now, you should want to hum the music. I know sometimes atmospheric music, I can't quite wrap my head around it, but for some people, they like it. But that's what it's called. That's why it's called atmospheric music. That's why it's called ambient music. It's supposed to be in the background, It's supposed to set a mood rather than... But and for me, I don't want to just have a mood be set.
Right.
I want to be able to groove to something.
That's something that, Eric Satie, who's a composer from back in the day, he made this music called furniture music at first. I think this is an antecedent to atmosphere music, actually. And
even though Eric Satie wasn't necessarily an atmospheric composer. I mean,
he wasn't. But this is later on. This is later on afterwards. He's known for other stuff besides the.
No, I know. Hey, no, I've got a whole collection of.
In fact, I think Eric Satie actually seems to have done things before. He seems to have done stuff before everyone else was doing it.
Well, there's that one.
But hold on, let me just.
There's that one. Short film that I saw in my silent movie class in college that Eric Satie I think co-directed, but he also wrote the music
with Cocteau, with Jean Cocteau.
I can't remember who he made it with.
I think
I want to say it was Louis Manuel, but I might be mistaken.
Jean
about
Cocteau, that's the name of him, right? The guy though, I'm thinking
of. Maybe I don't know, but
yeah, I think so.
But anyway, it might have been with Louis Manuel. I can't remember. Oh, I think it was actually with Salvador Dali that he made this movie.
Keep going.
But the music is really cool. It's kind of circusy and stuff like that. It's a real experimental short film for like just way back in the day.
Did you say circusy? Because it could be parade actually that he used. I mean, I don't know. Maybe not. But that's the famous piece by Eric Satie. Anyway, he created this thing called furniture music. Maybe towards I don't recall actually what part of his career it was, but I think it was the latter half for sure. And he intended it for it to be background music. He didn't want. That's why it was called furniture music, you know. And people started to like it for some reason though. And he was like, "You fool!" I mean, I think he said something like "you fools" or something like that. This is not supposed to be enjoyed. It's for the background, you know. And it's just kind of funny that basically that's the kind of stuff that, you know, people like this atmosphere music right now, and it's supposed to set a mood, but it's like I'm not gonna turn on this music to just listen to. You know what I'm saying? Like I might set it in the background as a tone.
But you know, that's art for you, huh? It's completely subjective.
To each his or her own, like an ice cream cone.
And that goes for video game music too. We're just telling you our own personal opinions about it.
Right. And, you know, I guess, oh, by the way, Nicky, you had mentioned that there's composers now that are creating music that are in the video game style, in the style, like 8-bit and 6-bit era style. What are those called? Those songs? Those composers? You say chip composers or something? Like
chiptune composers?
Chiptune composers.
But, you know, but they even lose touch with... They're just using They're just using 8-bit sounds, but they're making music...
Just by the way, but there's some guys that are really good and they know what they're doing.
Sure, there's some guys that are really
tight. It's really tight. Vert, he's really awesome. Vert, oh my God, check
that guy
out.
A lot of these chiptune composers, they use these 8-bit sounds because they think they have an appreciation for video game music, and they do. They might have an appreciation for
it. But Vert knows what he's doing, man.
I know,
knows what he's doing.
But I'm not saying that
he knows it well.
Okay,
he knows the world well.
That's not what I'm saying, though. I'm saying there's a lot of them out there, though, that are trying to sound like old video games, but they're not, because they're not restricting themselves to the sounds. Max, I know that there's... God, you keep saying no. I know Vert and...
I'm not saying that. I'm saying no, they're not trying to sound like the old stuff, actually. They're they're not exactly trying to sound like the old stuff. They're trying to take qualities from the old stuff, and it's like Quentin Tarantino or something like that. You know, his stuff is very modern, but he's taking stuff from the old films and stuff like that, you know, but using it to his advantage, you know, for his own creations, you know. And I think that's in the same way what these composers are doing, and they have a vast knowledge of the old stuff too, and you can tell, and that's what makes it cool. And I think that's very good stuff, you know.
By the way, you're right that is. Jean Cocteau.
Yeah, I've seen some of that film.
But no. I'm not talking about the film. I'm talking about that
the name of the guy.
The name of the guy you're thinking of, was it Parade or something like that? Parade, which is a ballet that he and Cocteau worked on. The film that I was talking about is called Entr'acte, and it was by a guy named René Clair, who was a surrealist. That's why I got it confused with Dali, because he was also a surrealist. And the music to that is kind of circusy, and it's a real experimental film. It's only 22 minutes long, but it's interesting. Anyway, I'm going off.
Anyway, the final word is...
Why do you have to end every episode with a final word?
Well,
I think it's better to end an episode with just saying some statement and then not trying to add something after it.
No, but I think the final word is...
No, not the final word.
No, can I just say the final word is... you know, you can like any type of video game music you want, and you can decide for yourself what is really truly.
I basically said what you're saying right now just a few sentences ago.
I'm not
a few thoughts ago, and I thought, oh, what a perfect way to end the episode. But you kept going. I'm
not finished though. See, you're interrupting me right now. What I'm trying to say is the final word is, you could like whatever you want, and you can decide whatever you want, what you feel is truly video game music, but there is something uniquely the way 16-bit era and 8-bit era sounding music, the way it sounded, that is lost today. And I think for the most part, and I think that it's a shame because that stuff is really good. And I think there's a lot more that can be done with that, as proved by these proven by these chiptune composers. They're taking that kind of genre and expanding it, and I think we haven't quite, exhausted all of our potential.
As one of our favorite singer-songwriters noted, his name is Bart Davenport, and he told me before, he's like, sometimes I get criticized for my music sounding too retro or vintage, and he said, but I think there's always more to explore in that genre of music, and so why do I have to attempt to try to sound new when I like what I like? I'm influenced by what I'm influenced by. And so I'm going to write. He writes really classic sounding pop songs. And I argue if he were around in the 70s, he probably would be really popular today. But, there's a lot more in any genre to be explored. And why limit yourself to trying to innovate when you make that your goal? You're actually restricting yourself, because you can innovate in already genres that were already created.
Yeah, but you could innovate. It's to whatever you want.
To each his own, like an ice cream cone.
Teach his or her own. Or in today's case, I gotta say, teach their own, like an ice cream cone. Although, I mean, that's.
To each his, her, or their own, like an ice cream cone.
Right.
Why can't you just let a statement end? Why do you have to add something extra?
Well, I don't know. I'm
going to try it again. To each his, her, or their own, like an ice cream cone. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Splitting Hairs with Max and Nicky.
And tune in next time.